Just give me a second as my computer tries to handle all the different tabs and channels. That's there. Pop out the chat. And move it to the other spot. Okay. And then put me back on my Mishnah text. All right. So, Mishnah, time to get back to work. It's been a while, but hopefully people still remember all the different materials that we went over so that we can pick up where we left off. Does that sound good to everyone?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Very good, very good.
As near as I could tell, and I was having trouble, like I said, with my connection right before the class was meant to start. I was luckily able to get it going just at 7. But from what I could tell, we had finished Mishnah 4, but had not begun Mishnah 5. My video playback of the YouTube cut out before I got that far. So, but I didn't think we got to Mishnah 5. Did we?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I started on Mishnah 5.
What's that?
I started reading Mishnah 5 today.
Okay. So from my notes, I believe we're on Eruvin 6, chapter 6, and Mishnah 5. Which is the one that's in the center of the screen. If I happen to be wrong, if someone can go back and watch the whole video, which my internet did not want me to see today, then let me know. But otherwise, I think we're picking up where we are supposed to be. And we are continuing our discussion of Eruvin for combining different properties into a place where the carrying of goods from one place to another is permitted. That is the context in which we find ourselves in Mishnah 5. Good. A householder who is in partnership with his neighbors, with this one in wine and with the other in wine, they need not prepare an eruv. So what is going on here? So what it's talking about is that, as we know, to make an eruv, you have to share foodstuffs. It's the establishing of a meal, which shows the establishment of residency. So if you are already a business partner with someone or someone's in your little courtyard or in your alleyway partnership, and you share the partnership around wine, then that means some of my wine is already in your property, and you already own that wine too, and so does the other investors in the wine. Right? We're partners, and since we are partners in that property, that already counts as having shared the foodstuffs for the eruv. Everyone following the logic?
Hey, I have a question.
Yes.
When it says partners, and I know I might be getting ahead of where we are, it seems like they mean more than 2 people, like they're referring to 3 people from the next Mishnah.
So in Mishnah 5, where we're starting off here, it's saying that if you're in a partnership with the neighbors, plural, and as we're going to see, it has to be, we're dealing with a case of more than one, but it could be only one. So if there were only 2 residents of a courtyard, and both of them had gone in on a wine shipment, the wine shipment was in one guy's house and not the other guy's house, that would be good enough, it seems to be what the Mishnah is saying, for the eruv partnership. But if there are multiple partners, that's where the second part of the Mishnah kicks in. But if his partnership was with the one in wine and with the other in oil, they must make an eruv. So what is the issue? The issue is that if they are partners with different people in different things, then that means there isn't an overlap between all of the people who are in the eruv partnership, because they're not all sharing one meal, not all sharing one food. Does that everyone follow that logic?
Yes.
Okay. Rabbi Shimon, who loses, argues that as long as they share something, they're okay, right? Neither in the one case nor in the other need they make an eruv. He believes that the overlap is sufficient and that is the overlap of people who happen to share with other people who share with other people. As long as people are in partnership and the food is somewhere, everyone's in partnership with the same food.
You're breaking up, Rabbi.
I think someone's making a bit of background noise.
Oh.
Everyone's hands off mics, right? No one's doing their ASMR tapping on the mic. Okay, so as long as Rabbi Shimon argues, as long as everyone's in partnership with someone for a foodstuff, we're okay. But the Mishnah says no, it has to be a shared food. That's the whole point of the Eruv establishment, and therefore it has to be just wine or just oil or some such shared item. Yes, Aaron.
So why does Rabbi Simon lose?
I'm sorry, what?
Why does Rabbi Shimon lose?
Because it's the emphasis is on the shared.
Right,
If,
but he talks about sharing. It's just not the same thing, though, right?
well, then that's not sharing, right? So if let's imagine rather than food, we're talking about we'll keep food, right? But we're talking about laying out a dinner table, and I invite 2 people to my dinner party, and I tell the first guy, you and I, we're going to be sharing the lamb. And I tell the other guy, you and I, we're going to be sharing the salad. But you don't get any of the lamb, and you don't get any of the salad. But I can have both. Would you say that we all shared a meal?
But I thought the purpose of the Eruv was not to say me and you share this stuff. It's to contribute to it. Because the same thing with wine. If you bring a bottle of wine, and the other guy brings a bottle of wine, and the 2 drink from this bottle, and then the other 2 drink from the other bottle, that's kind of similar to the lamb and the salad, because they're not sharing the bottles of wine, though, isn't it?
Yes and no, right? So yes, you don't have to actually partake of. You do have to contribute, as you're describing. But the important thing is that you could partake of, that you have access to it, that you are permitted. That's the whole idea of using this as a metaphor for the shared residency of the people, which allows the carrying between property and domains.
Right.
And if I cannot even hypothetically do so, then I don't really have even a theoretical level of ownership to be able to say, we're all in this together.
Right, but I thought the circumstances they describe here at the partnership, not every partner could take of another partner's wine, though. Because
well, yes, actually, yes, they can. I mean, it's not that they can come and take it whenever they feel like it, but they all share ownership in it, right? They own some of that wine. We're not talking about a partnership like doing a co-op where we all bought a shipment of wine from the kosher wine store, and when the wine came, we then divided it into each house. Right? This has not been divided. This doesn't mean this is your wine, this is your wine, this is my wine. This is we own wine together. Regardless of where it's currently sitting, I still own it, or at least my portion of that wine. So it's not just a question of, we shared it, it's we share it. Currently, at the moment, I have a partial stake of ownership in that wine, and so does he, and so does he.
all right.
So why, Rabbi, for Eruvin, wine and oil is different? Because for wine, you don't need to create an Eruv, and for oil, yes. So why oil is different than the wine?
So it's not the oil that's the problem. It's that there's no overlap, no universal overlap among the members of the Eruv. If they all had a partnership in oil, that would be fine. It's the mixed partnership that makes it invalid. Right? If A and B share wine and B and C share oil, then A and C share nothing. And therefore the Eruv is invalid. But if A and B share oil and B and C share oil, that's fine, because it's now a group partnership.
So they need to share the same product.
Exactly. But really what Mishnah 5 is trying to tell us is that you can almost have an accidental Eruv, that you don't need to necessarily create an Eruv from scratch if you already have a business partnership that is shared by the members of the Eruv, then you've created an Eruv, whether that was your original intention for going into business together. It's not expected to be the typical one, of course. Yes, Aaron. You're muted.
If you have 3 people who share oil and 3 people who share wine, can you just have one bring in oil and one contribute wine?
If it's, well, so yes, but it wouldn't be one, right? If you have 2 partnerships, business partnerships, let's try and be clear. You have 2 business partnerships. You have the oil consortium and you have the wine consortium. If the wine consortium, with the approval of its members, contributes wine for an Eruv, and the oil consortium, with the approval of its members, contributes oil for the Eruv, then now you have a combined shared foodstuff. That would be fine. But you might as well just have each person contribute individually at that point as well.
The question I have, Rabbi, is why they have an same product that prevent the need of having an Eruv? What makes so special having the same product that you don't need a roof?
Because it's a shared food. It's the idea is that if we all own a piece of the wine, then that's the same as we all own a piece of the figs, a piece of the grapes, of some other produce that was all being contributed into the shared Eruv.
So if I talk with all my neighborhood and say, hey, you know what? Let's share a piece of bread. All of us, no matter if there are 10 or 15 houses, if everyone put a bread, meaning that we don't need any roof.
Oh, no, you wouldn't need an Eruv. You would be making an Eruv by doing so.
So it will be a huge one. That's it. Having this just one common food. So what is the limit? Like
right.
if all the town do the same product?
Right. So Mishnah, chapter 7 and going forward is going to talk more about what foods are qualified for different types of Eruvin. There's slightly different standards as we've sort of brushed against for the courtyard versus the alleyways versus the tehum for traveling. But for the moment, let me just draw your attention that bread happens to be like the universal food, of course, because bread is so central in Jewish symbology as being the literal staff of life. But for a rudimentary example, not meant to be halacha l'maaseh for your neighborhood, because there's lots of other issues of, what the perimeter looks like. But imagining you lived in an ancient world, in an ancient courtyard, in a style accustomed to the Mishnah being described, if each person contributes into the Eruv, then you can create something that is a shared Eruv marker that would create then a permitted zone for carrying within that space. Sorry, someone decided that they really, really want to just keep texting me. Even though I mentioned I'm in a class, but there we go. So yes, you can create this shared thing. And yes, exactly as you described, basically going house to house is one of the most rudimentary ways of establishing an Eruv. Going to house and collecting to form that shared final product. In this case, it's not a question of everybody having to contribute the same for the final product. This is a question of everybody already owns the product. That's the main novelty in Mishnah 5. It's not about the accumulation of one particular product. It's not that everyone would have to give oil or have to give wine. It's everyone already owns oil or everyone already owns wine. And the question is, does that already ownership count? And the answer from this Mishnah is yes, but only if it is universally shared. Okay, let's move on to Mishnah 6. Oops, come on. All right, so 5 companies of men, right? So these chavarot are groups of people that would often come together in either symposium form or for other purposes, and they spend Shabbat in one hall, right? They gather together in sort of like a large communal hall, inn, tavern. It's hard to really get a full handle of what the social structure looked like in our modern terms, but you've got these different groups that are all together in spatially within one building, but identity-wise, they are separate. Beit Shammai says an eruv for each and every company, meaning Chavura A has to make their own eruv, even though their eruv covers the same space as Chavura B, which also makes their own eruv to cover the same space, and so on and so forth. The idea being that the identity of each one of the groups, of each of the Chavurot, needs to mark their own eruv with their own material, their own foodstuffs. Beit Hillel says one eruv for all of them, right? They're all in the same space, even if they're not all of the same group identity. But therefore, if one of them makes an eruv, if one of them establishes that this space is a shared space, that is good enough for all of them around. So very interesting, underlying point for conversation is it enough to be in the same area to be considered as part of the same large group, meta group, or do you actually have to explicitly join with them in your identity as a group in order to make it so that you can share the benefit that comes from being part of the larger group? That seems to be the essence that they're arguing about. And Beit Hillel is arguing that sharing the same space is sufficient in this case. They agree, however, that where some of them occupy rooms or upper chambers, that they must make an eruv for each and every company, right? If there is Chavura A in the ballroom upstairs, and that is a separate room from where Chavura B is, that's in the mezzanine, balcony appetizer room, then each of them are going to need their own eruv in order to take advantage of the travel leniencies that come from having an eruv or carrying leniencies. Does that make sense?
But they are in the same house.
They are in the same house, but the idea here is that even Beit Hillel agrees that their separate identities are reinforced by the separate rooms and chambers that their groups are occupying. Meaning that if, we'll use a modern example. I'm sure that most people here have at one point or another gone to a conference or like one of those big hotels where they do conferences, and you'll see that they have like different rooms that are set apart for different groups. And you might have the trial lawyers in one part, and you might have the fraternal order of police in another part, and you might have the barbers association in another part. Even though they're all in the same conference hall, they're not all part of the same conference because they each have their own place. Now, if you opened up the whole room and you had the trial lawyers and the fraternal order and you had the barbers association all in one giant space, then I would say, hey, they've kind of made a declaration that they're at least somewhat together, that they are sharing that space. But once you put walls between them, that reinforces their separate identity, which means each of them has to make their own statement of an eruv for gaining the benefits.
And what happens if they are in the same huge hall and each group catch and corner? They are the same but very far, like separate, the identity is very clearly separated. Can we say that in this case that Beit Shammai is right?
So you're saying like a middle school dance where all the boys are on one side and all the girls are on the other. Exactly. Yes. So that would be an interesting discussion. I don't remember seeing any argument about what the maximum size of the room or minimum size of the room needed to be in order for the two positions to be correct. I mean, Beit Shammai might agree that if everybody was in a 10 by 10 room, not right now with the social distancing, but if everybody was in a 10 by 10 room, even if there were 3 different groups, come on, guys, we're all together. Or he might argue identity is still the dominant feature. So I haven't actually seen a good discussion that went into the size of the room itself. Like I said, one of the difficulties of talking about this Teraklin, this hall, is they had something very clear in mind. The same way that if I say conference hall, most of you probably have something in mind of what a conference hall looks like. Exactly what its dimensions were is hard to reconstruct, and what the feel of that place is hard to reconstruct. So I'm afraid we're going to have to leave that as a teku, I'm not sure. But what we can guess, as we segue to the next one, is what about family? What happens if you have family who share a courtyard? Meaning that you have a father's household, and then in a separate building in the courtyard, you have one of his sons, and then another one of his sons in another building, and so on. How do we handle that situation? That situation. Brothers who are partners who were eating at their father's table, but slept in their own homes, must each have an eruv. Right? So the basic premise, which we will branch out from, is that you have brothers who are in partnership together, so they are not completely separate in their identity, and they eat at their father's table, which means they are still being supported by their father, but they have their own place to sleep, meaning they have their own room, their own home. They each then need to contribute in order to create the eruv, right? They are part of that situation a bit, but they still have to finish the act because they have enough independence to still need to contribute to make that final defined eruv. Hence, if one of them forgot and did not contribute to the eruv, he must annul his right to his share in the courtyard. This goes back to what we talked about before, where if one person didn't participate, they would annul, and that would allow everyone else to use their portion, meaning their rights within the courtyard to come and go in the shared space. So they would be treated basically like any other non-family member of the courtyard. However, let me just finish this, Aaron, and then we'll get the question. When does this apply? When they bring their eruv into some other place, but if their eruv is deposited with them, or if there are no other tenants with them in the courtyard, they need not prepare any eruv. So if the eruv goes into son number one's house and son number one forgets to contribute to it, that's okay, because the owner of the house where the eruv is being stashed does not necessarily need to contribute because he already has the rights to that space. Additionally, if there are no other tenants, then because they still eat from their father's table, they're still being supported by him, their dependency on him diminishes their independent identity just enough that if there is no other person within the courtyard, they can be considered as being part of his extended family, the father's extended family, and therefore they don't need an eruv for carrying within that courtyard space. Go ahead, Aaron.
Wasn't another one of the interpretations, wasn't that they must annul, but that they have annulled? Basically, it's saying by not contributing, you automatically annul your share in the eruv?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, again, I don't want to go into modern Eruvin, but as we saw in the Mishnah, technically, the members of a courtyard have the right to refuse to cede their portion of the courtyard into the communal shared space. And that is why they use the term must annul. That it's not just automatic.
Didn't the notes, I thought the notes said something about if you didn't contribute, then they have annulled.
So the notes actually talk about a different girsa, a different version of the Mishnah.
All right.
Right. So this short time out from the Mishnah itself. although we believe very much in the sanctity of the Torah and the transmission of its text, we do not believe that the Mishnah is a 100% perfect rendition of the very first version. There are discrepancies between our version of the Mishnah and the Talmud, and there are discrepancies between the most common printed versions of the Mishnah and some manuscripts, handwritten copies that are much older than the current printed versions. So what the notes are referring to that Aaron was talking about is that there are some manuscript versions, which are generally considered more reliable, that use the term he annulled rather than he must annul. And the argument from our commentary is that it basically means the same thing because we assume that he annulled his share and that he did not have to have, and not that he had to have done so in actuality. But that's an interpretation based upon the different versions of the Mishnah. And getting into all the different girsayot, the different copies of the Mishnah and how they can play with the words back and forth is probably going to be beyond our discussion for most of the Mishnahs that we go through. All right, Mishnah 8. Hearing no objection, moving on. Come on, line up. Let's get, come on. Don't know why. Safari is a wonderful, wonderful website, as you've all heard me say. It's just sometimes where it thinks your mouse is can get a little confused. 5 courtyards, which were opened into the other, and into an alley, and they made an eruv for the courtyards, but they did not share in a shituf for the alley. They are permitted, meaning the use of the courtyards, but forbidden that of the alley. Right? So you have 5 courtyards, and they open up into the alley. And each makes a eruv for each courtyard, but the courtyards do not make an eruv that joins them into the alley as well. Each courtyard can certainly use their own courtyard, but they cannot use the alley as well because they have not created the alleyway courtyard or the alleyway shared eruv. Does that make sense? Good. Here's the flip side. If they shared in a shituf, the partnership for the alley, but not in the eruv for the courtyards, so this is the opposite of our first case, they are permitted the use of both. And so this is a very important concept in Eruvin, which is there is a hierarchy of Eruvin. If you make an eruv for the alleyway, meaning combining multiple courtyards together, then the individual courtyards do not need to make their own eruv. But the opposite is not true. If individual courtyards make their own eruvin, they do not automatically gain access to the alleyway that connects all of them. The alleyway trumps them. It's one way of looking at it is kind of like pools of water, right? The alleyway is a higher pool of water, and each courtyard is a lower pool of water. The lower pools of water can easily make their own pool, but if they want to join with each other, they need to make a connection to the top pool. They need to make openings. But if they make connections to the top pool, that's obviously going to flow into their lower pools as well. Right? So that hierarchy, that higher level of the alleyway covers the lower level of the courtyards off the alleyway as well. Does that make sense? No one's saying no, so we move on. If they made an eruv for the courtyards and they made a shituf for the alleyway, so they're doing both versions, and one of the tenants of a courtyard forgot to contribute to the eruv, they are permitted to the use of both, right? So normally, as we talked about, if a tenant in the courtyard forgot to participate, then they are usually going to be out of luck. In this case, they will not be, because the alleyway partnership covers all the residents of all the courtyards. If one of the residents of the alley forgot to share in the shituf, they are permitted the use of the courtyards, but forbidden that of an alley, since an alley to its courtyards is as a courtyard to its houses. Right? So they don't make quite the same leniency for the residents of the alley who forget to participate in the partnership, as it is, like I said, of a different caliber of that relationship. Okay, moving on to 9. We're going to get 9 and 10, two related concepts, and this has to do with nested courtyards, which is to say you have one larger courtyard, and then as a subsection of that courtyard, there is a smaller courtyard. All right, so you would walk in through the gate to the main courtyard, and then you would go through another gate into a smaller courtyard that is wholly part or subsumed within the larger courtyard itself. Everyone got the mental picture, or do I have to fight with the drawing?
No.
Okay. 2 courtyards, this one inside the other. If the residents of the inner one prepared an eruv, but those of the outer one did not prepare an eruv, the inner one is permitted, but the outer one is forbidden. Right? So all the people in inner courtyard, they can still carry in the inner courtyard, no problem. The people of the outer courtyard cannot carry in the outer courtyard because they didn't make an eruv for themselves. And of course, since they're not residents of the inner courtyard, they can't carry there either. Pretty straightforward.
It's very also connected with the previous one.
Exactly right, exactly right. If the residents of the outer one prepared an eruv, but not those of the inner one, they are both forbidden. All right, so here is the novelty, what we call the chidush, right? What we wouldn't have known without the Mishnah. Because the little one, the inner one, is completely inside, it means that their only means of traffic is through the outer courtyard. So they are tantamount to residents of the outer courtyard as well. Right, their status is like they are, because of their ingress and egress, their rights of going in and coming out, they are functionally like residents of the outer courtyard, and therefore, if they didn't create an eruv that included them, if they have no rights, then their lack of rights spills into the other area because their traffic goes into the other area. If the residents of each courtyard prepared an eruv for themselves, each is permitted on its own, the sort of vanilla case. Big courtyard makes their own, little courtyard makes their own. Rabbi Akiva forbids the outer one because the right to walk in it prohibits it, the idea of that. But the sages say the right of way does not prohibit it, that in this case, where they each have their own, they are allowed to make an eruv that is, even if it's isolated from one another, meaning that outer courtyard made an eruv with only outer courtyard, and inner courtyard made an eruv with only inner courtyard, then the sages say that is sufficient, even though in our previous sentence we said that the right of way of the inner courtyard could cause problems for the outer one. Because they both did what was minimally adequate, an eruv for their own, we allow that to stand.
Yeah, but Rabbi, we didn't see that sometimes when you have a few feet to the more than the roof, you can overlap between them. So also if you have an in and out, because you have, I don't remember how many feet it was, 6 feet, 5 feet, I can remember, in each direction, so you are overlapping. So also you can share the same eruv for overlapping between the two areas.
I think you're talking about the eruv for the tehum, for the traveling, yes, where you could have two different cities that could overlap the distance in which you could walk, but that was not about carrying, right? For carrying, there are very specific rules of where one domain begins and the other finishes. And so as far as the overlapping goes, once you would go through the portal to the inner courtyard, that is a separate domain.
Okay. So carrying is much more strict than walking.
Well, in some ways, yes. In some other ways, no. In terms of walking, you can actually lose parts of your permitted territory by putting an Eruv in a certain place. But by putting an Eruv in a certain place for this, you don't lose anything. If I make an Eruv for my alleyway, I don't lose a part of my courtyard. But if I make an Eruv for walking, I lose the opposite side of my city.
Okay.
Outside my city. All right. Now, part 10 is going to be, like I said, based off a similar similar concept. If one of the residents of the outer courtyard forgot to participate in the Eruv, the inner courtyard is permitted, but the outer one is forbidden, meaning the inner courtyard still remains its own unit, and therefore it is not damaged by the outer person who forgot to participate. If one of the residents of the inner courtyard forgot to contribute to the Eruv, both courtyards are forbidden. Again, going back to the concept in the middle of our previous Mishnah, that because of they have the right-of-way, they need to be included in some form, or else they will damage the permission in the outer form, the outer courtyard. If they gave their Eruv in the same place, and one resident, and whether of the inner courtyard or of the outer courtyard, forgot to contribute to the Eruv, both courtyards are forbidden. Meaning that if the inner courtyard and the outer courtyard both put their Eruv in one building, in one or the other spots, and somebody forgot to participate because they were sort of sharing the whole unit, then the whole unit is now messed up and no one is allowed to carry in that zone. If the courtyards belong to individuals, they need not prepare any Eruv, right? If I have my own courtyard, I don't need to have an Eruv for my courtyard because I don't need to share the space with anyone else. It's just me. And even if I have a courtyard nestled off of mine, that's his, and he's allowed to have his own Eruv as well. And what he does and what I do does not impact each other. Aaron, thanks for your patience. What's your question?
If one person doesn't participate in the Eruv, how come we can't assume that he revoked his right to participate in the Eruv and everyone else can share like we did previously?
Well, like it was discussed doing previously, but the rabbis are very loath to make that a first case decision. Right? They very much prefer to say the law is, if they don't, that the Eruv is invalid because they have not relinquished their rights. Now, if, as the Gemara goes into more detail, we can assume that they relinquish their rights, then we are willing to use that extenuating circumstance. But the Mishnah wants to be clear with us from the beginning that we don't start there. We have to start with the idea that one person not participating invalidates the whole thing, and then we will need to fix it, which is what the Talmud goes into more detail on. But remember, go ahead.
I was gonna say, what was it about assuming they relinquish their rights? After why don't you do that later on after they don't participate?
Well, you can in many circumstances, unless you have, clear reason to believe that they were not going to participate. They didn't want to participate, because in general, having an Eruv, even if that person can't participate in it, is not detrimental to them and may even be beneficial to them. So in general, as we're going to see in chapter 7, Judaism does allow a certain amount of leniency to interpret someone's behavior for their benefit, even if they didn't give clear instructions to do it. But we cannot interpret it to their benefit if they gave clear instructions to not do it. If someone leaves $5 at your house and you put it into a safe drawer, they're not going to complain that you shouldn't have touched their money. Because generally speaking, taking the money and putting it away safe until you can get it back to them is something that they'll appreciate. On the other hand, if they say, if you ever see any of my money, I don't want you dare touching it, then you shouldn't touch it. And we start off by reminding ourselves, you're not allowed to touch other people's money. And then we give examples of when you are. In this case, you're not allowed to touch other people's property. And then we come up with reasons when you can. All right. Yeah. You know what? Let's go ahead and we're just going to start chapter 7 because we're doing well on time. And I think we can get through at least one or two because the first few in chapter 7 are pretty straightforward concepts. So moving from what would be a typical doorway or opening to an alleyway, we're now going to go to the unusual ways that property might connect. If a window between two courtyards was 4 handbreadths by 4 handbreadths, so we're looking here at about 12 to 16, 18 inches. So, roughly about like that in size, and was within 10 handbreadths from the ground, meaning 10 tefachim is about 30 inches, about a meter. The tenants prepare 2 eruvin, or if they want, they may prepare 1. So what is the implication here? The implication is that if you have a minimally sized window that a person could squeeze through, and it was at a height that a person could get through, the commentators point out that it just has to start at least a meter from the ground. It could be lower, it could be higher, but at least the bottom has to be a meter from the ground. That's not a normal door, but it is an opening big enough that if they want to make a joint eruv, they can. And it's small enough that if they want to keep it separate, they can stay separate, right? So this is an optional portal rather than being an obligatory one. If the size of the window was less than 4 handbreadths by 4 handbreadths or higher than 10 handbreadths from the ground, they may prepare 2 eruvin, but not 1. This is really just a window. Once you make it smaller that nobody can go through it, or higher that it's not easy to get through, then it's really just a window. It's no longer a possible opening. And having crawled through a number of windows in my life, I think their measurements here are just about right. Trying to go through a window that's much higher than that is very, very hard, and trying to go through a window much smaller than that, even though I'm not the largest person in the world, gets rather tricky. Any questions on that idea? All right, so now we've made a hole in the wall between 2 courtyards. What if we make a wall between 2 courtyards? How big does a wall have to be to count as a wall? Right? If I have 2 courtyards next door to each other and there's just a little bump between them, does that really mean they're separate domains? Well, if a wall between 2 courtyards was 10 handbreadths high, that's our 10 tefachim, are about 30 inches, 1 meter up, and 4 handbreadths thick, that's about, again, 1 foot, 16, 18 inches wide, 2 eruvin must be prepared, but not 1. Right? Once it's 30 inches up and it's that thick, which actually we'll find out later on is not important for the eruv, but important for the food up on top, technically a wall of any thickness would do the same job of separation. If it's about 30 inches high, then they have to be considered as 2 separate domains. If there was produce on top of it, meaning you actually have a wall big enough, this 4 tefachim, 12, 16 inches on top, and someone put food up there, the residents from this side may climb up and eat, and those from this side may climb up and eat, provided they do not bring it down. That zone up there is considered to be a pseudo overlap of each of the courtyards in allowing people to access it, but not to transfer between it. Not to transfer over, definitely, but also not to transfer from the up to down or from down to up. If the wall was breached, a breach of 10 cubits, meaning someone knocks a hole in the wall that is 10 cubits, which is about 15 feet, so there's now a gap in the wall, the residents prepare 2 eruvin, or if they prefer, they prepare 1 eruv, because it is like a doorway. So even though this is not a formal marked alleyway, but just a hole in the wall, literally, it can be treated as though it were a doorway, allowing for 1 shared eruv or for 2 separate eruvin. If the breach was bigger, only 1 eruv and not 2 may be prepared. Once you go bigger than that, you may feel like you're part of 2 different courtyards, but the space that connects you is big enough that you have to treat it as though it is 1 space. questions or comments on that idea?
Is there any way that you can draw the numbers for 1 and 2?
I can write the number. Sure. Just a second.
Yeah, because I need to visualize in metric or in feet, and it doesn't matter, okay, but in standard with metric, but I need to visualize both 1 and 2, exactly the size and dimensions.
Right. No, I understand completely. All right. So one way to do this is so 10 handbreadths, right? 10 handbreadths generally is equal to about 30 inches, right? Approximately, or 1 meter. All right, that's a rule of thumb. Again, the precise sizes is open to debate. That's why, because I know that 30 inches does not equal 1 meter. It's just I learned that an easy way to round it was 3 inches per tefach per handbreadth, and so that's my easy way of remembering it. But I know that 30 inches means nothing to people who live in a metric world. But 30 inches is approximately 1 meter. It's a few inches off, but hopefully that at least gives our non-imperial people a benchmark. Right. So, as I was saying, 1 tefach, right, is approximately 3 to 4 inches. And I'm not good on inches to centimeters. If someone else wants to try and work that out. It's, basically the distance across your hand, right? Not here to here, but here to here. So you could just imagine going like this when trying to measure.
1 tefach is 1/10 of 10 handbreadths, meaning should be 10 centimeters.
There you go. Very good. A second. Will it let me edit this?
The math teacher to help us.
That's why we keep you around, right? There we go. Which means approximately 10 centimeters.
Natan, and only that reason.
Yeah, I know.
All right. So yes, that is the measurements that we're dealing with here. So these measurements are fairly standard, meaning you don't normally find things like 12 tfachim unless it's a particular case. 10 tfachim is a general measurement that's used for this. It's used for Sukkot. It's used as a general measurement of height that is substantial. It's also used for a depth that is substantial, as we're going to see in the next Mishnah.
So when do you know when is a handbreadth and when is tefach? Because here I was reading, they didn't say what is. They say 2, 4 by 4, 10, but they didn't specify what is the unit. How do you know?
No, it's context. I mean, obviously, it's also tradition, the Masorah. One teacher tells one student, we're dealing with tfachim here, but context also will tell us, right, that we're not talking about, the measurement of the width of a finger, because no one would consider 30 fingers high to be a wall. And we're not talking about amot, a cubit, because 30 or 10 amot high would be like 15 feet, and there's no, that cannot be the minimum measure of a wall. A wall that's 10 feet high, everyone would know was a real wall. So by context, we can also work out that we're dealing in tfachim.
Okay.
But yeah, the general rule is you learn it the way your teacher taught it to you. That's what it means by Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. So we're just going to finish off with the basic description of a ditch. Maybe next week we'll pick up with a little bit more about holes. But I just want to show you the parallel for part 3 before we deal with the differences. If a ditch between 2 courtyards was 10 handbreadths deep and 4 handbreadths wide, they may make 2 Eruvin, but not 1, even if it was full of stubble or straw. right? So they have no option except to make two Eruvin, even though the gap, even though there's air that is shared between these two areas, that ditch, that hole, that moat is substantial enough that it has to be treated like two separate spaces. Even if they put something in it that is filling it, like straw, like hay for a horse. So now it's possible to walk over the top of it. That is still not sufficient, and therefore it needs to be treated like two separate places. And again, for handbreadths, we're looking at about 40 centimeters, almost half a meter, almost, what would that be, about 18 inches or so for the width. If it was full of earth or gravel, on the other hand, only one eruv may be prepared, but not two. If you fill up a hole, even if it's still technically a hole because you've only filled it with loose earth or gravel, then it basically is as though the hole doesn't exist, right? It might still be a hole in stone and it's filled with something loose, easily removable, but you're not removing earth and gravel on Shabbat, right? That would be prohibited on Shabbat. Therefore, you can treat the two spaces as one. And in fact, you can only treat the two spaces as one, even if you would have rather it to have been separate. If you want them to be separate, dig out the hole before Shabbat begins.
Rabbi,
yes.
Rabbi, I have a question. When it says fill, it means you only have to make it 9 cubits deep, right? Like if it's 10 cubits, you only need to put a cubit of earth in there, right?
You would need to reduce it so that it was no longer considered to be the barrier, yes.
Right.
Any other questions? Okay.
No. Just
We're
glad to see
starting-
you back, Rabbi.
It's good to be back. All right, so we'll continue next week with Mishnah Eruvin chapter 7 and Mishnah number 4. So you can all read ahead. Remember, Sefaria is a wonderful free resource, and I look forward to our continuing discussion next week.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Welcome back.
Friday.
Thank you.
And Rabbi, and we have on Sunday our answer for Daf Yomi.
Yes. On Sunday, those who are interested in joining the Daf Yomi, the Talmud review for the current cycle of the Daf Yomi, are welcome to join, and that should still be at 4 o'clock. Yes.
That will be a marathon because there are a lot of questions.
Well, I can't guarantee. I've got another program that I do at 6:30, so I can't guarantee going forever. But we'll try and make a dent in all the questions that you guys have been asking.
4, correct?
Yes.
Isn't it hard to do the Daf Yomi weekly since it's a daily reading?
It's harder to do it weekly as a summary, but it's easier to schedule to get people together once a week than it is to get people together 6 or 7 times a week. So we're not reading the Daf all together. Everybody's reading the Daf on their own, and then any questions that they have left over, they send to me, and then I give them answers and try and explain them on Sunday. So it's not doing the whole 7 days worth of the Daf in one sit down. That would not be a good idea.
Rabbi, can I suggest something for the next shiur?
Obviously.
Move on. Can we start maybe the shiur with the bracha lasok b'divrei Torah?
So, it's an interesting question. As you know from our ritual committee meetings, the thing about doing the bracha of the mitzvah of studying Torah is that is generally considered, at least by the Ashkenazic authorities, to have been a bracha that we do at the beginning of the day, and that is considered to be holding as constant until the end of the day, and we fall asleep and wake up for next shacharit. And my own teacher, Rabbi Dorf, from rabbinic school, was very clear that according to the Ashkenazic tradition of this, is that to say it twice in one day would be a bracha levatala, that it would be a null blessing, an improper use of Shem and Malchut, of God's name, and referencing God's sovereignty. It would be as though we were saying the first blessing that we said was inadequate or somehow had been canceled, implying that we had deliberately diverted our mind from Torah at some point. So that's a long way of me saying I have no problem beginning with a prayer. I just would want to begin with a prayer that wasn't the la'asot b'divrei Torah.
Because Rabbi, most of the people don't say the blessing in Shacharit. So that never said that. So it's not the Batala would be the only time to do that. That's why, and we can explain that in case that you say this before Shacharit, so don't say. But if you didn't do it, now it's your opportunity to do that.
All right, so just a second here, because I'm going to make some comments. I don't want to be going on to YouTube.